Keith, my guess, when you do research like this, there are some things that are pretty obvious that come out of it, and others that are somewhat of a surprise. What did you find as this research began to unfold?
You know, I've already mentioned one, and that's we expected maybe that all the companies would be high-tech companies, and we discovered it's not what you make, it's what you make of it. Another thing that kind of surprised us is, you know, we've all heard the pitch from professional investors, private equity people, venture capitalists, and that sure you can grow, but you could grow so much faster with our money. And there's this point of view that if you really want to grow and be successful, you need outside money. And I think in certain industries for certain products that's true. But we were really surprised to find that of our 9 breakthrough companies, not one of them received early stage venture capital, you know, which is really a remarkable thing. These are companies that funded their growth through sales and profits. And that's not to say that sometimes other people's money isn't a good idea. It's just to say that the idea that you need other people's money to grow fast is a myth. You know, another one is, well, what's the background of the CEO, right? Do they all have MBAs? And what we found out is, you know, it doesn't matter what school you went to. It doesn't even matter where you went to school. What matters is kind of what you do with what you've got. So we have Scott Edmonds, who runs Chico's, who hit the bricks right out of high school. We have Tom Golisano, who finished his associate's degree. And then we have, you know, a PhD in Jim Goodnight, who runs SAS Institute. So just a wide variety of backgrounds.
Well, Keith, what were the universal concepts that seemed to come out of the 9 companies?
There are really 6 characteristics that we identified. And we're not saying there aren't other characteristics, but these are the ones that really kind of bubble to the top for us. And the first one is called crowning the company. You know, I love to tell the story. Most people know that George Washington was our first U.S. president, but very few people know that he was actually almost our first king. At the end of the Revolutionary War, we were out of money. The country was badly divided, and some people in the military approached George Washington and said, the only thing that's going to hold our country together is if you agree to let us crown you king. And he refused. And I'm convinced he refused because he had kind of a deep insight into what the Americans were building early in our history. And he understood that no one person could be sovereign over such a great and powerful idea. And we found that people who run breakthrough companies were really good at, from the very beginning, building a company they planned to be bigger than themselves. So that was the first concept. The second concept, you know, it's interesting. Most people think of entrepreneurs as being great risk takers. And a little bit later, I'll talk about the fact that that's really a myth. We did some empirical work to establish that that's a myth. And we found that what happens actually once a company becomes successful is actually there's a tendency for entrepreneurial leaders to take fewer risks and to become more cautious. So the second concept we found was that breakthrough companies continue to up the ante as the stakes of the game increase.
So taking calculated risk.
Calculated risk and continuing to match the size of their bet with the growing market opportunities they face. The third concept was building company character. And we in the book distinguish between companies that have a value statement and companies that have character. And we found this theme of character to be pervasive in all 9 of the companies. The fourth characteristic we found was these companies figured out a way to do what we call navigating the business Bermuda Triangle. We found that the things that make you successful as a small business, at one point, as you get bigger, stop working. And at that point, you're in the business Bermuda Triangle. And the companies that find their way out of the business Bermuda Triangle are the ones that continue to grow over the long term. You know, so many of us define our business as the 4 walls of our building. And all the new ideas that we think is going to come from within that kind of concept. And what we found is companies that built breakthrough performance over a period of decades were careful to erect scaffolding. And by scaffolding, what we mean by scaffolding is resources outside your firm that help you get to the next level. Resources like the Renaissance Forums that basically help people bring in outside ideas and outside perspectives. And then finally, we found that breakthrough leaders enlist insultants. And we define an insultant as someone who's willing to take a full swing at the issues and someone who's willing to question even the fundamental assumptions upon which the firm is based. And these 6 characteristics, we think, provide the engine for a company to kind of sustain that entrepreneurial growth.
You use the term throwing the dino. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, throwing the dyno is a rock climbing concept, and you can see we're sitting here in my home, and we've got these beautiful Wasatch Mountains out the window, and I occasionally get up there with my ropes and equipment and climb some rocks. And throwing the dyno is a place in a climb whereby you have a foothold and a handhold, and you see a foothold or a handhold just out of reach. And you kind of have to spring from one place to the other. And in the middle of the jump, you're kind of exposed. And if it weren't for your safety equipment, you know, you'd plummet to your death. And I like the concept of throwing the dyno because these companies were all marked by a tendency to essentially being willing to sacrifice who they were for what they could be. Always asking the question, this is great, but how do we get to the next level?